Welcome back. It's time to return to the verbal system and to learn our third of the 5 Hebrew verb forms, the participle. You remember that there are 2 finite verb forms, perfect and imperfect, which we've learned. A finite verb limits the action in time, so those are the verb forms that express tenses like past and future. The perfect and imperfect also tell you who did the verb. There are separate forms for each person, gender, and number. There's an imperative form, the command form, sneak preview. This is related to the second person imperfect. Think about it. There's a verbal noun called the infinitive because it describes the action of the verb without limiting it in any way. And finally, there is the participle, the verbal adjective of the Hebrew system. Like the man in the play by Molière who discovered he'd been speaking prose all his life, you've been using participles all your life. We have them in English. Using, and you've been using, is a participle. Participle is a grammatical term that means verbal adjective. You can say in English, he is smart, or you can say, he is talking. I, for one, don't really think of talking as an adjective, but that's exactly what it is, a verbal adjective. If you don't believe me, ask a talking dog. A barking dog, a big dog, a small dog, a talking dog. All of these are adjectives, but talking and barking are derived from verbs. I talked on the phone, the dog barked. But that ing form can be used as a verb or as an adjective. All of these same things apply to the verb form we're going to learn today, the Hebrew participle. Since it's a verbal adjective, you already know how many forms it has. 4, just like tov, tova, tovim, tovot. Participles are masculine or feminine, singular or plural. So they're not marked for person. Makes no difference whether it's me or you or him, first, second, or third person. As long as we're all masculine and singular, the same participle agrees with all of us. Participles, like all other adjectives, have gender and number, but not person. And here are the forms of the Kal participle. Omer, omra, omrim, omrot. Just like tov, tova, tovim, tovot. Wow, can it really be that simple? Almost, but not quite. Because feminine singular participles, though they do occur with the tova, omra ending, actually prefer to have a segalit ending. So it's more helpful to learn the participles this way. Omer, omeret, omrim, omrot. Both of those forms occur, omra and omeret, and they both occur with participles and with regular adjectives. But the a form, tova, is much more common with adjectives, and the segalit form, omeret, is much more common with participles. So we're going to learn participles that way. One more time, omer, omeret, omrim, omrot. Now you. Good. And now let's take a look at how these participles are used. You can use them as verbs the same way we do in English. I'm learning Hebrew. Soon I will be reading the Bible in Hebrew. Notice that the participle, the verbal adjective, the ing form, is the same whether you're doing it today, you will be doing it tomorrow, or you were doing it yesterday. When you do an ing verb in English, you're doing what's called the progressive tense, past progressive, present progressive, or future progressive. The participle is the progressive part, the ing part, but the time of the action comes from the verb to be. I am, I was, I will be. Hebrew doesn't bother with that form, doesn't even have a present tense of the verb to be. So when the participle is used as a verb, what you have is a nominal sentence, a sentence where you have to get the tense from context, just as if it were a regular adjective. At the beginning of the book of Kings, we saw, Vehamelech David zaken, and King David was old, adding was just to make it good English. And now look again at what God said to Cain in Genesis 4:10. Dimei achicha tzoakim elai min ha'adamah. Dam means blood, but it's sometimes used in the plural in biblical Hebrew. And you can see that it's plural here because Tzerei Yud, plural construct, the blood of your brother. And then comes a kal participle from the root tzadi ayin kuf, to cry out. Omrim tzoakim. O after the first letter of the root, shva under the second letter of the root. It's a compound shva here, because ayin doesn't like to have a simple shva, but omrim and tzoakim are exactly the same grammatical form, kal masculine plural participle. Your brother's blood is calling out Eli, to me, min ha'adamah, from the ground. Where am I getting is calling? From the context. This is direct speech. God is speaking directly to Cain and telling him what's happening right now. But let's go to 2 Kings 8. Elisha's servant Gehazi went to tell the king that Elisha had brought a child back to life. And suddenly a woman and a child walked in. And Vehine ha'isha tzoeket el hamelech. And behold, Vehine ha'isha tzoeket. The woman was crying out, El Hamelech, to the king. Kal, feminine singular participle, just like tzoakim was masculine plural. So how do I know that God was saying, your brother's blood is calling, while here in 2 Kings, the woman was calling? Answer. In 2 Kings, the narrator is telling us a story about something that happened in the past. This woman was crying out in the 9th century BCE. When you read a nominal sentence in the Bible, a sentence where there's no perfect or imperfect verb, biblical Hebrew doesn't need to express the time, but English does, and you have to fill in the appropriate tense. Is crying out, was crying out, will be crying out. Oh yes, what happened in the story? Gehazi said, Vayomer Gehazi, Adoni Hamelech, Zot ha'isha vezeh bena. My lord the king, this is the woman, and this is her son. No verb to be, but we're helping Gehazi say it in English by adding is, since he's speaking to the king in real time. That's what you do with a nominal sentence. Now an aspect of participles that's extremely common, we've seen it already, and it's this. A participle is also an adjective. And an adjective, even more often in Hebrew than in English, can be used as a noun. So for example, the root shin mem resh, to keep or guard, kal participle forms, shomer, shomeret, shomrim, shomrot. Does shomer sound familiar? Genesis 4:9, ha-shomer achi anochi? Am I my brother's keeper? You remember that ha, it's the interrogative hey, turning this statement into a question, and shomer here, kal, masculine singular participle, a verbal adjective, is being used as a noun in construct with achi, my brother. Shomer achi, the keeper of my brother. A shomer is a keeping or guarding person, or in plain English, a keeper or a guard. Judges 1:24, Vayir'u hashomrim ish yotzei min ha'ir. Vayar, and he saw, Vayir'u, and they saw. Or rather, and saw, appropriate for a third masculine plural subject. And we don't need to say they, because here comes the masculine plural subject, hashomrim, the guards. Kal, masculine plural participle, being used as a noun. Vayir'u hashomrim, the guards saw. Let's keep reading. Who did they see? Mi ra'u. Ish, a man. Yotzei, same shape as omer or shomer or tzoek, kal, masculine singular participle of yud tzadi aleph, to go out or to leave. Ish yotzei min ha'ir, a man going out from the city, a man leaving the city. Vayir'u hashomrim ish yotzei min ha'ir, and the guards saw a man leaving the city. One participle being used as a noun, shomrim, one being used as a verb, yotzei. If the singular participle can be used in construct, shomer achi, my brother's keeper, then so can the plural. Shomrim in the absolute form, in the construct form would be shomrei. And here it is. Ule shomrei mitzvotai, and to the keepers of my commandments. Shomrei mitzvotai. Now, because participles are what they are, they can act as an adjective or noun and as a verb simultaneously. Here's an example from Zechariah 11:11. Hashomrim oti. Hashomrim, the guards. Oti, me, the object of a verb. How do I put these two words together? And what if the direct object is a noun, or even a longer phrase? Hold that thought while we look at another example from 1 Kings 10:8, where the Queen of Sheba, remember her? Malkat Sheva, is overwhelmed by what she sees at Solomon's court. Let's read this whole verse together. There are two participles in it, both of which have the definite article and also take objects. Here we go. First, that word ashrei. Remember it? Technically a construct plural, but it's that word that means happy, the first word of the book of Psalms. So ashrei anashecha means happy are your men, your anashim. And eved means a servant or a slave, but the king is everyone's lord, and everyone is his servant. So slave would give the wrong impression here. Ashrei avadecha ele, happy are these your servants, or perhaps better, these servants of yours. And here come the participles. Ha'omdim lefanecha tamid, hashom'im et chochmatecha. Ayin mem dalet, to stand. Shin mem ayin, to hear. Tamid, always. And chokhmah means wisdom. Let's simplify the equation a bit to focus on our task. Happy are anashecha ha'omdim lefanecha tamid. It's not just that your men are omdim. They are omdim lefanecha tamid. You're standing before you always, men. Might work in German, but is just not English. Here's how we say that kind of thing in English. Your men who are always standing before you. Hashom'im chochmatecha, who are hearing your wisdom. So when you see the definite article on a participle, you basically have two possibilities. If the participle is by itself, you can turn it into a noun and translate ha the way you normally would as the definite article, the. But if the participle flips over into verb mode and takes an object or a prepositional phrase, it's usually best to translate the definite article as a relative pronoun, the ones who do that participle. So back in Zechariah 11:11, Hashomrim, the guards, but Hashomrim oti, the ones who were guarding me. Let's look at a few more examples of kal participles. Here's another biblical Hebrew root worth knowing, another participle used both as a noun and as a verb. The root is shin, pei, tet, to judge. And what's the masculine singular participle of this root in the kal? Shofet, a judge. Plural, shoftim, judges. And sefer shoftim, the book of Judges. One of the most famous lines in the Bible has the kal participle of this verb and an interrogative hey to boot. Genesis 18:25, when Abraham is negotiating with God about not destroying the cities of the plain because some righteous people might be killed in the upheaval. First, notice the difference between ha-shofet with the definite article, the judge, and ha-shofet with the interrogative hey. Patach shva under the hey and no dagesh in the shin. So it's question mark, shofet kol haaretz, a construct phrase, the judge of all the earth. Lo ya'aseh, shall not do, mishpat, justice. It's very, very common to make a noun by putting a mem in front of a three-letter root. What do we have? Question mark, the judge of all the earth shall not do justice. Now let's turn that into a question the English way. Shall the judge of all the earth not do justice? The fact that shofet and mishpat are from the same root makes Abraham's rhetorical question even more pointed. Shofet, but not mishpat? Doesn't make sense. Now, Numbers 25:5, one you can totally do on your own. Vayomer Moshe el shoftei Yisrael. Pause for a minute if you need some time to think about it, but I really am going to leave this one for you to do on your own. This is probably a good moment to point out that shoftim in modern Israel are more or less the equivalent of judges in the American judicial system, but a shofet in the Bible is not necessarily that kind of judge. The judges in the biblical book of Judges may rule on cases, but judges is not really a good name for their position. They were the rulers of Israel in their time. Please keep that in mind when we look at our next example from Judges 4:4 about Deborah. He shofta et Yisrael ba'et hahi. Notice our feminine singular participle here, not the omer omeret kind, but the good old tov tovah kind. He shofta et Yisrael. King James, she judged Israel. The New Revised Standard Version, she was judging Israel, translating more like the way I taught you to think about participles. And the Jewish Publication Society, she led Israel. I would be happier if they said she was leading Israel, but notice that they've avoided the modern connotations of the word judge to convey something more like what the word shofta meant in biblical Hebrew. We haven't talked much about vocabulary on an abstract level, but this example is a good reminder about a couple of things. One, trying to translate word for word can trip you up. Two, What you want to do is to understand, not necessarily to translate. 3, that's good, because sometimes translating is harder than understanding. Ba'et hahi, at that time, what was Deborah's role at that moment in history? Hi shofta et Yisrael ba'et hahi. And you understand it, and you could explain it to someone, but we don't have to translate it. Hi shofta et Yisrael ba'et hahi. We get it. She was running the country. Now there are participles in every binyan. Merachefet, which we saw in Genesis 1:2, is a piel participle. But kal has a second set of participles which must somehow be left over from the kal passive that disappeared from the language. You remember the passive binyanim, not the active to do something, but the passive to be done. The passive binyanim are pu'al, the passive of piel, and hof'al, the passive of hifil. They both have that u'ah pattern that seems to be what Hebrew used to mark the passive. The kal passive participle has exactly that pattern, but in reverse, a'u. If someone is keeping something, he is shomer, but if something is being kept, it is shamur. And the kal passive participle uses the tovah feminine singular type form rather than the omeret segelet shape. Let's look at the root kaf taf bet, to write. Kal active participle, kotev, kotevet, kotvim, kotvot. But the passive forms are katuv, ktuva, ktuvim, ktuvot. Again, katuv, kituva, kituvim, kituvot. And now you. And an example from Joshua 8:31. Katuv besefer Torat Moshe, as written in the book of the teaching of Moses. Construct phrase, Sefer Torat Moshe. One last time before we move on. The kal active participle, omer, omeret, omrim, omrot, and the kal passive participle, katuv, ktuva, ktuvim, ktuvot. OA versus AU. Now a little change of pace. We're going to talk for a few minutes about conjunctions, particles that relate clauses and sentences to each other. The basic conjunction in Hebrew is, of course, the vav that serves as and, or but. And the has to be at the head of the line. When you're using it to link clauses, the vav has to come first, just like and or but in English. But there are a couple of other words that start clauses in Hebrew. They have their English equivalents too, of course. Let's look right now at ki and asher. We've seen both of these words before, and they both can be translated that in certain circumstances. But that's a coincidence. They're very different words. Let's start with asher, the relative pronoun. You'll be happy to know that it has one form and one form only. No different forms for different cases, qui, quai, quo, no masculine or feminine, singular or plural, nothing like that. Asher is always going to be asher. The boy who cried wolf, the girls that cried wolf, the participles which we learned today. Anytime you want to refer to something earlier in the sentence without repeating it, that's asher. To remind you, here are a couple of examples that we've seen. Et hapikadon asher hofkad ito. The deposit that was deposited with him. And Genesis 3:11, Hamin ha'etz asher tziviticha levilti achol mimenu achalta? Question mark. From the tree which I commanded you not to eat of it, Achalta, you ate? That's asher, the relative pronoun. Now, ki, we've seen it too, but it's a very complicated word. It has a number of different meanings that we'll just sample today. First, the one we learned way back when, ki meaning that, but not that, the relative pronoun. If you can replace that with which in English, you want asher. If you can't, you want ki. Ki means that in expressions like, I saw that, she knows that. Did you hear that Mayor Haig just came down with bubonic plague? We saw this ki on the first day of creation. Vayar Elohim et haor ki tov. God saw the light that it was good. Or as we would more naturally say, God saw that the light was good. That's usage number one of ki. Number two is that ki means when or if. Not when the question, but when introducing a statement. Joseph told his brothers, when Pharaoh calls you and asks you what you do for a living, here's how to answer. When Pharaoh calls you, ki yikra lachem paro, and Deuteronomy 28:9, ki tishmor et mitzvot Adonai Elohecha, if you keep the commandments of the Lord your God, ki tishmor, if and when you keep them. And another important meaning of ki is to introduce an explanation, because or since or for. At the beginning of the second version of the creation story, in Genesis 2:5, we're told that nothing was growing yet in the garden. Why? Ki lo himtir Adonai Elohim al haaretz. Because, and here's where I want you to employ your Hebrew chops. Put together what you already know, because you should be able to understand absolutely everything in this phrase except the verb. And you should be able, one, to recognize which word is the verb, and two, try, this is a challenge, to parse the verb. Ki lo himtir Adonai Elohim al haaretz, for the Lord God did not blank on the earth. And what's in the blank? Root, mem tet resh, hif'il, perfect, third masculine singular. Remember that the name of the binyan gives you the shape of the third masculine singular perfect. Matar means rain. Himtir, he caused it to rain. Nothing was growing yet. Ki lo himtir Adonai Elohim al haaretz. Because ki, the Lord God, had not caused it to rain. And one more conjunction, hine. If you have that kind of Bible, hine is the word translated as behold. But it's really a pointing word, or better, a point of view word. Just like behold, if you think about it, which we never really do, hine is trying to get you to see something from a certain perspective. When you tell someone your dream in the Bible, you're trying to get them to see what you saw. So you always tell a dream with hine. Joseph tells his brothers, hine, we were binding sheaves in the field, and hine, my sheaves stood up, and hine, your sheaves made a circle around it and bowed down to it. You can also put suffixes on hine, the same kind you would put on ein. The most famous example of hine with a suffix is hineni, or in the pausal form, hineni. First common singular suffix, hinemi. That is how you answer the telephone in biblical Hebrew. When God calls to Abraham in Genesis 22:1, Abraham says, hineni, behold me. That is to say, here I am listening. Let's look at verse 11 also, when Abraham is just about to sacrifice his son, What happened? Vayikra elav malach Adonai min hashamayim, vayomer, Avraham, Avraham, vayomer, hineni. A malach is a messenger, in this case, a divine messenger, an angel, and you know everything else in this verse. I'm not going to translate it for you. I'll just read it one more time. Vayikra elav malach Adonai min hashamayim, vayomer, Avraham, Avraham, vayomer, hineni. And now, the combo plate, hine plus participle. The idiom hineni or hine anochi, followed by a participle, means I am going to do that participle. Here's an example from Exodus 23:20. God is talking to Moses. Hine anochi sholeach malach lefanecha. Sholeach, the kal, masculine, singular, active participle of shin lamed chet, to send. Notice that it ends with a guttural chet. So it's got to have a patach inserted before the chet. Omer, kotev, sholeach. You know the reason for that inserted patach. You always have to have an a vowel before hey, chet, and ayin at the end of a word. Once you know that, you can look past it and recognize that sholeach is exactly the same grammatical form as omer or kotev. Hine anochi sholeach malach lefanecha. I am going to send a malach, an angel, lefanecha, before you. Hine plus anochi plus a participle, I am going to. Hine anochi sholeach malach lefanecha. Or you could trade in the pronoun for a suffix and turn it into a contraction. Hineni sholeach. Not hineni in this construction, because that's the pausal form of hineni, and you're not pausing, you're going right ahead to that participle. We're going to look at one more verse from Genesis 22, the story of the binding of Isaac. But before I forget, your challenge this time is to find as many kal participles in Numbers 22, kal active participles, that is, as you can. There are 3 kal passive participles. Can you find them? Now let's finish by working through Genesis 22:7. Our story so far, God has told Abraham to take his son Isaac and offer him up as an olah, a burnt offering, on top of a mountain that God will show him. They set off, but Abraham did not tell Isaac or Sarah or anyone else what was going on. Here's verse 7. Vayomer Yitzchak el Avraham aviv, Vayomer avi, Vayomer hineni vini, Vayomer hine ha'esh v'ha'etzim v'ayei haseh le'olah. Vayomer Yitzchak el Avraham aviv, and Isaac said to his father Abraham. Remember that av is slightly irregular. That eve ending is not o like we would expect, but it is the vav that says third masculine singular, his father. Vayomer avi. Notice that when you talk to your own relative in biblical Hebrew, you add the ending and you say literally, my father. Vayomer avi, Vayomer hineni vini, and he replied, yes, son. Bini, my son. Hineni, here I am, you have my attention. Vayomer, and Isaac said, hine ha'esh v'ha'etzim, here are the fire, the esh, and the wood, the etzim, plural of eitz. Ve'ayeh haseh le'olah. But where is the sheep, the seh, le'olah, for a burnt offering. Let's hear it once more. Vayomer Yitzchak el Avraham aviv, Vayomer Avi, Vayomer Hineni v'ni, Vayomer Hinei ha'esh v'ha'etzim, v'ayeh haser le'olah. An unanswerable question. See you next time.